Hi, I'm Mikki Morrissette, a member of First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis for about 7 years. It's a pleasure to talk with you again, this time from the comfort of my own home. Even when it seems like so much is standing still, we've also seen tremendous movement in the past few months. Whether we like it or not, we're being forced to reevaluate our reliance on convenience, give greater regard to social interactions we miss, and discard what we can live without. There are positives and negatives that go beyond merely COVID test results. For example, I wish we'd been able to do a community celebration of life at First Unitarian Society after my dad died in early March. Yet I am grateful every day that he died just before the lockdown at the vet's home, where he'd been living with dementia for several months. I wish my Minnesota Women's Press magazine business was not in such a tight survival mode right now, yet I am grateful to have some big picture time to think about new strategies for bringing in revenue. Like all of us, I was horrified to see more police brutality so close to my home when George Floyd was murdered. Yet I have been heartened to see the confluence of pent-up pandemic energy and outrage at how terrible we are at making important changes that are coming together into worldwide anti-racism protests. I miss having a cocktail while hearing live music, yet I have enjoyed seeing how visual and performance artists are finding new ways to express themselves. Community murals and plywood art, home recordings. Artists are experimenting with the public canvas. I used to listen to songs in my short commute to our North Minneapolis office. Now I have time to listen to full albums again. One of my primary obsessions, as my kids will certainly tell you, has long been Explosions in the Sky, which is a band from Austin, Texas, which you can kind of hear in the background now. They feature elaborate guitar work in epically long songs. The music might seem improvisational, but the notes actually unfold and refold from the same roots. It is collaborative, instrumental music in motion, with no leader and almost always no words. Patterns of the music weave together repetitively and yet not, each moment something familiar, but a variation on what came before. I was introduced to their music about 10 years ago by a young musician who did work on the basement apartment in my home. At the time, he had Ayn Rand-influenced libertarian leanings, and we had a 4-hour discussion in my kitchen one evening about what he believed and why. The album he introduced me to was titled "The Earth is Not a Cold, Dead Place." I was mesmerized by the first song, which is what I'm playing now. It runs 9.5 minutes, called First Breath After Coma. The first 24 seconds are a single note that repeats like a simple beep on a heart monitor until a variation kicks in. The heart gains strength and more notes come into play, leading to greater complexity as the minutes beat on. The band refers to their music as cathartic mini-symphonies. There are other great examples of music layering into each other. I always loved watching jam sessions unfold in pubs in Ireland, where new people would arrive with their instruments and figure out how to join into improvisational music. I have loved the drum circles at the May Day Festival and other places. I saw video of a flash mob in Europe that kept building the sound of Ravel's Bolero. People in England that coordinated taking out their garbage and then entertaining their neighbors by dancing to the Time Warp from Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's a great video if you haven't seen it. David Bohm has people off the street come into the public theater in New York City to become part of a choir. He's been doing that for a long time. There are links in this PDF of this talk, by the way, of some of this music and other resources that I'm using for this talk. The required sheltering of the past few months has given us more examples of how we layer together our individual selves to create something more powerful together. We opened today's session, for example, with a beautiful compilation by Minnesota Orchestra of the sounds of violinists and percussionists and wind musicians whose individual recordings from home were fit together alongside Dessa singing the lyrics to Skeleton Key. My talk today is essentially about how we fit together as a layered symphony, not just as parts to play or as individual voices or instruments. I see music as an example of something bigger about how the universe works, because there is a wholeness in a co-created composition. Music is a great example of how to remember that we are not simply in isolated booths making individual recordings. It's a reminder of how we fit together in a harmony that gets stronger as we layer together. And even when there are some off-key notes in the group, the harmony can lift us past that. So I've had the privilege of giving several talks at First Unitarian Society. In 2016, my talk was titled On Visibility and Fragmentation. At the time, I had just interviewed a Black community leader after the death of Philando Castile. Don Samuels had said, "Where is the respectability in ignoring the needs of a 4-year-old child who had just witnessed a policeman kill a loved one? Where is the humanity in deciding it is more important to handcuff the unarmed mother than it was to let her hold and comfort her little girl? It is insulting to human life," he told me. Yet it is so routine, certain lives don't matter, that we don't even notice enough to be outraged about it. We continue to grind people down day after day, he said. 4 more years, we have been living in that same society. And 4 more years, people have been getting ground down again and again. My talk was given a few months before Trump was elected. I suggested that commerce, industry, technology, and political rivalries have largely been allowed to take over the storyline. We have devalued the human and glorified the machinery and the capital and the drama. What if we refocused our conversations on the relationships that lead to our ability to be a society? I concluded my talk with these thoughts. If we proactively start with the notion that our universe is fundamentally connected, then maybe the ways we divide ourselves up politically, economically, and socially will begin to seem so small and inconsequential that it no longer makes sense to fixate on them. 18 months later, I bought Minnesota Women's Press to try to do just that, to tell different stories so that we wouldn't be finding ways to divide ourselves up, but would be much more wholesome about the way we see our community, we see our ecosystem, we see ourselves. Today, I want to share some of what I'm learning from the women we've been featuring in our pages and on our website. But before I get there, please indulge me with a few moments connecting to the ideas of theoretical physicist David Bohm. Some of you have heard me talk about him before. His thoughts have been a big inspiration for me because they're not only about science, but simultaneously about spirituality and politics. I recently watched a new documentary about Bohm's life and concepts called Infinite Potential. There's a link to that in the PDF version of this talk at firstunitarian.org. In Bohm's 1980 book, Wholeness and the Implicate Order, he wrote that our human need to break things down into fragments creates an illusionary sense that our world is not at its essence interconnected. In his 1987 book with David Peat, titled Science, Order, and Creativity, he wrote, "Perception and communication are inseparably related. so that creation arises as much in the flow of ideas between people as in the understanding of the individual alone. Bohm strongly believed in dialogue. He recognized and experienced, because of Robert Oppenheimer and Joseph McCarthy, how rigid people can be. He saw this with the great scientific minds of Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein, who refused to talk to each other even when they both worked at Princeton because they disagreed about how the universe works. We all experience this. Bohm said some of us resist all social change in a blind and often destructive way. Yet others, he pointed out, are rigidly attached to the call for revolutionary change and pursue their ends in a similarly blind fashion. What he suggested we learn how to do is offer a kind of free play within the individual and society so that the mind does not become rigidly committed to a limited set of assumptions. Out of this free play could emerge the true creative potential of a society. And this is where dialogue comes in. When we weave together our notes with other notes, our instruments with other instruments, we create a new moment that is tied to the movement that connects us all. Bohm suggested there was an implicate and an explicate order. In non-scientific terms, the explicate for me is like seeing a product as the entity you can put a price tag on, buy, use, and discard. The implicate is noticing how that product connects to the way the resources were gathered, manufactured, transported, and also what happens to those resources after use. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it isn't connected. Similarly, if we use the music analogy, when we hold a note, it is still part of the composition or movement that comes before and that follows. A day in our life is tied to what comes before and what comes after. A visual analogy is that of the relationship between a wave and an ocean, continuously folding and unfolding and refolding. A wave is influenced by what came before and influencing what comes after, always connected to the ocean as the whole. Bohm is someone who saw that everything has this movement that folds and unfolds together in one long composition. Just because we see time and space in human terms, not in terms of the universe, does not mean the connective field does not exist. So let me literally bring this down to earth. Because of my role as publisher and editor of Minnesota Women's Press, I've talked with many women who recognize how our connected movement works and are actively taking steps to create a stronger harmony. Several women in our July climate issue are a great example of this. Winona LaDuke, for one, has long recognized that we have set up our marketplace with a strategy that is dying of its own suffocating grip. She describes our general system of business as a cannibal economy. She points out that today we have shrimp caught in Scotland that goes to China to be deveined before being shipped to the U.S. COVID-19 has required industrial farms to bury uneaten potatoes, dump millions of gallons of milk, and destroy thousands of unhatched eggs. That is a harmony that is off-key. So she's becoming a doula to the next economy, as she puts it. She believes it is our job to help give birth to a new future. LaDuke is developing a hemp farm in northern Minnesota with a group of young environmentalists. She explains how hemp is a much more eco-friendly textile and was once commonplace in Minnesota, with 11 mills in towns like Winona and Stillwater. Corporations took textile manufacturing largely offshore, and consumers became addicted to the cheap clothing. Synthetic fibers made from petroleum-based chemicals also became more commonplace, which introduces toxins and waste into air and water. She is working with other white earth tribal communities to co-create a co-op market around hemp. The climate land leaders are also in that magazine issue. This is a group of primarily women who are learning together how to use restorative agriculture techniques on farmland they own in Minnesota, Iowa, or Wisconsin. They're in the process of seeking 10,000 acres of land for smarter strategies they're honing at a farm in Northfield. Our story includes an image of what the Northfield farm looked like before and after regenerative methods. It is remarkable what we can bring back to life and health when we're in harmony with the way nature is set up. Christelle Porter was our cover subject in July. She's a woman in North Minneapolis who's engaging in the politics of society and forming a lobbyist group of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to change the way we approach water waste, transportation, city development, consumer choices, and more. Gaia Dil Discoli, who grew up in First Unitarian Society, is also in our July issue. She writes about how she stopped procrastinating and what she learned in the process of getting solar panels installed on her roof. These women are all part of a new focused storytelling campaign we're calling Ecolution. Eco, or eco, as Rev David would tell you, comes from a Greek root word that means house. Our ecology is about the story and logic of the home, where we live. Plants, insects, soil, microbes, water, humans. How is our complex ecosystem moving as a whole? I also learned of the term ecotone, which is a region of transition between two communities, such as marshlands that bridge dry and wet ecosystems, grasslands between desert and forest. It's a place where two communities meet and integrate. It combines the root eco with the Greek root word for tension. I believe that today we are living in the ecotone, the place where our ecologies are in tension. Another vital eco, of course, is the economy, how we distribute to our households, how we use our shared resources to thrive. I believe we need to start telling stronger stories, layering our voices together about the wholeness of eco. Minnesota Women's Press is beginning a #Ecolution campaign in August. Our slogan is a co-created story-sharing revolution that amplifies innovators working toward equitable economies and sustainable ecosystems. There will be more details at the womenspress.com website about it in the coming months, and you can temporarily sign up for our e-newsletter on the website if you want to learn more. But the basic gist is that we're bringing together people of all ages, backgrounds, and genders who want to be part of the Ecolution community, amplifying the revolution in stories and systems that are being co-created and will eventually drown out the off-key notes. Ecolution members will offer story ideas, give insights into products and services that are in harmony and tell us why. We'll be going into more depth about action steps involving regenerative agriculture, food justice, water protection, cooperative economies, and more. It's very much a community effort. Who can tell stories of how this present moment links to the past and has impact on the future? The goal is to stop telling stories that are only about the present moment and to start to train ourselves to do the same in day-to-day conversation. With the internet at our disposal, we don't need to let social media memes and TV sound bites dictate what we learn from each other. Let's have more free play and dialogue. Let's use our various expertise, our instruments and voices to create a new world every day that folds and unfolds and comes back out again. Let's let our waves in this vast ocean influence each other. Let's really let education do what it is meant to do. Our entire evolution as a species has been because we learned to keep adapting from each other. We don't have to train off-key notes how to sing better if that is not our strength, but we can share what we know about how the past connects to a present moment and is likely to influence the future, and let that ripple through the ocean. We can be intergenerational, teaching and learning from each other. Mainly, I do think we need to be less present moment as this single note that we play, and work together to hear how we tie into the rest of the composition. I started to move into this type of storytelling in our April eco-quarantine, as we called it. When we couldn't do a print magazine for several months, I had more time at home for writing. I wrote an essay called Silent Spring that pointed out how Rachel Carson's message in the 1970s was partly that our diversity is how we build our resiliency, and that we are dying right now because we are allowing our systems to operate as if we're all independent habitats that have nothing to do with each other. I quoted an interview Vox did with Sonia Shaw, author of the 2017 book Pandemic. Among other things, she pointed out that there were many cases of dengue fever in Florida in 2009. She said, "We coated the environment with insecticide and staged a military-style assault on these mosquitoes. But the mosquitoes that carry dengue have been in South Florida for a long time. That wasn't new. What was new was the foreclosure crisis," she said. "With all these homes closed, swimming pools were vacant, it starts to rain, and these empty pools fill up with water and create pockets that mosquitoes breed in. Nobody thought to address the housing crisis as a possible driver of the outbreak." We don't tend to think about how our economic systems and our ecosystems are tied together, but I think it is time for us to change that. We think of our economy, for example, as stock investments and speculation, commercial development, corporate global enterprise, industrial farms. These are not tied to the movement that unites our roots. These are not about home, but food co-ops and farmers markets and community-supported agriculture are. We know that lifting environmental regulations and using cheap labor is not feeding the health of the whole in any long-term way. We know that putting essential workers back to work in meat plants without safety precautions simply shuts down the whole enterprise. We also know that the off-key systems are not just about these past few months or these past few years or even these past few decades. Our other ongoing storytelling campaign is focused on the topic of transforming justice. In a few weeks, on August 18th, First Unitarian Society is hosting a visual Q&A, as we're calling them, with author Carolyn Holbrook and her granddaughter Tess Montgomery. Carolyn writes in our August issue. Tess has written 2 essays for us this year about financial trauma. Together, the two will talk with me about what these times mean for each of them, an intergenerational perspective on anti-racism work. Carolyn believes we are in the second trimester of a gestation process. She knows from the 1960s how difficult the birthing process can be. Her granddaughter, a millennial, takes courage from the young leadership of today, especially among women of color. So, we are in a revolution. We are starting an ecolution. It is intergenerational, it is intersectional, it is diverse, which makes it more resilient. Our role is to work together to tell stories that build greater solidarity around its messages, to become smarter consumers. It's about training ourselves to have conversations and share stories that reveal the ocean of which all the waves are a part, not letting what we directly touch be the only story, but tying it back always to what comes before and what comes after. It's about knowing that off-key notes can eventually be drowned out by the larger choir. It is, as always, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Thank you.